Robert Kane, born Robert Kahn, October 24, 1915 and died November 3, 1998, was an American comic book writer, animator and artist who co-created, with Bill Finger, the DC Comics character Batman. Kane also co-created the animated series Cool MC Cool. He was inducted into the comic book industry's Jack Kirby Hall of Fame in 1993 and into the Will Eisner Comic Book Hall of Fame in 1996. Robert Kahn was born in New York City, New York. His parents, Augusta and Herman Kahn, an engraver, were of Ashkenazi Jewish descent. A high school friend of fellow cartoonist and future Spirit creator Will Eisner, Robert Kahn graduated from DeWitt Clinton High School and then legally changed his name to Robert Kane. He studied art at Cooper Union before joining the Max Fleischer Studio as a trainee animator in the year of 1934. Bob Kane entered the comics field 2 years later, in 1936, freelancing original material to editor Jerry Iger's comic book What A magazine, including his first pencil and ink work on the serial Hiram Hick. The following year, Kane began to work at Iger's subsequent studio, Eisner & Iger, which was one of the first comic book packagers that produced comics on demand for publishers entering the new medium during its late 1930s and 1940s golden age. Among his work there was the talking animal feature Peter Pup, which belied its look with overtones of mystery and menace. 8, published in the UK comic magazine Wags and reprinted in Fiction House's Jumbo Comics. Kane also produced work through Eisner & Iger for 2 of the companies that would later merge to form DC Comics, including the humor features Ginger Snap in More Fun Comics, Oscar the Gumshoe for Detective Comics, and Professor Doolittle for Adventure Comics. For that last title he went on to do his first adventure strip, Rusty and His Pals. Milton Finger, born February 8, 1914 and died January 18, 1974, known professionally and personally as Bill Finger, was an American comic strip, comic book, film and television writer who was the uncredited until 2015 co-creator with Bob Kane of the DC Comics superhero character Batman, launched in 1939. Despite making major, sometimes signature contributions as an innovative writer, visionary mythos world builder and illustration architect, Finger and other creators of his era was often relegated to ghostwriter status on many comics, including Batman and Green Lantern, the original Alan Scott version. While Kane privately admitted in a 1980s audio interview with his autobiographer that Finger was responsible for 50 to 75% of all the creativity in Batman. For decades he publicly denied Finger had been anything more than a subcontractor executing Kane's ideas. As a result, Finger died in obscurity and poverty while the Batman brand and Kane amassed international fame and wealth. In the 2000s, Finger biographer Mark Tyler Nobleman's research uncovered previously unknown errors. At the urging of Nobleman, the online comics fan community and others, Finger's granddaughter revived the fight to restore his lost legacy, which continued for years. In 2015, DC Comics' parent company conditionally agreed to recognize Finger's intellectual property claim as co-creator of the Batman characters and mythos, officially adding his name, going forward, to the created by credit line Kane had gotten contractually guaranteed in 1939. Bill Finger was born in Denver, Colorado, in 1914 to an Ashkenazi Jewish family. His father, Louis Finger, was born in Austria-Hungary in 1890 and emigrated to the US in 1907. Little is known about his biological mother Rosa Rosenblatt. His stepmother Tessie was born in 1892 in New York City. The family also included 2 daughters or possibly nieces raised as daughters, Emily and Gilda. The family moved to the Bronx, New York City, where during the Great Depression Louis Finger was forced to close his tailor shop. Finger graduated from DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx in 1933. An aspiring writer and a part-time shoe salesman, Finger joined Bob Kane's nascent studio in 1938 after having met Kane, a fellow DeWitt Clinton alumnus, at a party. Kane later offered him a job ghostwriting the strips Rusty and Clip Carson. In early 1939, DC's success with the seminal superhero Superman in Action comics prompted editors to scramble for more such heroes. In response, Bob Kane conceived the Batman. Kane said his influences for the character included actor Douglas Fairbanks' film portrayal of the swashbuckler Zorro, Leonardo da Vinci's diagram of the ornithopter, a flying machine with huge bat-like wings, and the 1930 film The Bat Whispers, based on Mary Reinhardt's mystery novel The Circular Staircase. Bill Finger joined Bob Kane's nascent studio in 1938. An aspiring writer and part-time shoe salesperson, he had met Kane at a party, and Kane later offered him a job ghostwriting the strips Rusty and Clip Carson. He recalled that Kane had an idea for a character called Batman, and he'd like me to see the drawings. I went over to Kane's, and he had drawn a character who looked very much like Superman with kind of reddish tights, I believe, with boots, no gloves, no gauntlets, with a small domino mask, swinging on the rope. He had two stiff wings that were sticking out, looking like bat wings. And under it was a big sign, Batman. Finger said he offered such suggestions as giving the character a cowl and scalloped cape instead of wings, adding gloves, leaving the mask's eye holes blank to connote mystery, and removing the bright red sections of the original costume, suggesting instead a grey and black color scheme. Finger additionally said his suggestions were influenced by Lee Fox the Phantom, a syndicated newspaper comic strip character with which Kane was familiar as well. Finger, who said he also devised the character's civilian name, Bruce Wayne, wrote the first Batman story, while Kane provided art. Kane, who had already submitted the proposal for Batman at DC and held a contract, is the only person given an official company credit for Batman's creation. Comics historian Ron Goulart, in Comic Book Encyclopedia, refers to Batman as the creation of artist Bob Kane and writer Bill Finger. According to Kane, Bill Finger was a contributing force on Batman right from the beginning. He wrote most of the great stories and was influential in setting the style and genre other writers would emulate. I made Batman a superhero vigilante when I first created him. Bill turned him into a scientific detective. The character debuted in Detective Comics issue 27 in May 1939 and proved a breakout hit. Within a year, Kane hired art assistant Jerry Robinson initially as an inker and George Rousseau's backgrounds artist and letterer. Though Robinson and Rousseau's worked out of Kane's art studio in the New York Times building, Kane himself did all his drawing at home. Shortly afterward, when DC wanted more Batman stories than Kane's studio could deliver, the company assigned Dick Sprang and other in-house pencilers as ghost artists, drawing uncredited under Kane's supervision. Future Justice League writer Gardner Fox wrote some early scripts, including the two-part story The Monk, that introduced some of the Batman's first bat equipment. In 1943, Kane left the Batman comic books to focus on penciling the Daily Batman newspaper comic strip. DC Comics artists ghosting the comic book stories now included Jack Burnley and Win Mortimer, with Robinson moving up as penciler and Fred Ray contributing some covers. After the strip finished in 1946, Kane returned to the comic books but, unknown to DC, had hired his own personal ghosts, including Lou Schwartz and Sheldon Moldoff from 1953 to 1967. Early the following year, National Comics' success with the seminal superhero Superman in Action comics prompted editors to scramble for similar heroes. In response, Kane conceived the Batman. Finger recalled Kane had an idea for a character called Batman, and he'd like me to see the drawings. I went over to Kane's, and he had drawn a character who looked very much like Superman with kind of reddish tights, I believe, with boots, no gloves, no gauntlets, with a small domino mask, swinging on the rope. He had two stiff wings that were sticking out, looking like bat wings, and under it was a big sign that said Batman. Finger offered such suggestions as giving the character a cowl instead of the domino mask, a cape instead of wings, adding gloves, and removing the red sections from the original costume. He later said his suggestions were influenced by Lee Fox's popular The Phantom, a syndicated newspaper comic strip character with which Kane was also familiar, and that he devised the name Bruce Wayne for the character's secret identity. Finger said, Bruce Wayne's first name came from Robert Bruce, the Scottish patriot. Wayne, being a playboy, was a man of gentry. I searched for a name that would suggest colonialism. I tried Adams, Hancock, then I thought of Mad Anthony Wayne. Kane decades later in his autobiography described Finger as a contributing force on Batman right from the beginning. I made Batman a superhero vigilante when I first created him. Bill turned him into a scientific detective. Nobleman said. Bob Kane showed Batman to editor Vince Sullivan without Bill. Vin promptly wanted to run Batman, and Bob negotiated a deal without including Bill. Finger wrote both the initial script for Batman's debut in Detective Comics issue 27 in May 1939 and the character's second appearance, while Kane provided art. Batman proved a breakout hit, and Finger went on to write many of the early Batman stories, including making major contributions to the Joker character. Batman background artist and letterer George Russo's recalled, "What was good about Bill was that whenever he wrote a plot, he did a lot of research for it. Whether the setting was a railroad station or a factory, he would find a photo reference, usually from National Geographic, and give Bob all the research to draw from. He was very orderly and methodical. His only problem was that he couldn't sustain the work. He couldn't produce material regularly enough." Bill Finger recalled that, "Robin was an outgrowth of the conversation I had with Bob. As I said, Batman was a combination of Douglas Fairbanks and Sherlock Holmes. Holmes had his Watson. The thing that bothered me was that Batman didn't have anyone to talk to, and it got a little tiresome always having him thinking. I found that as I went along Batman needed a Watson to talk to. That's how Robin came to be. Bob called me over and said he was going to put a boy in the strip to identify with Batman. I thought it was a great idea." Kane, who had previously created a sidekick for Peter Pup, proposed adding a boy named Mercury who would have worn a super costume. Robinson suggested a normal human, along with the name Robin, after Robin Hood books he had read during boyhood, and noting in a 2005 interview he had been inspired by one book's N.C. Wyeth illustrations. The impetus came from Bill's wanting to extend the parameters of the story potential and of the drama. He saw that adding a sidekick would enhance the drama. Also, it enlarged the readership identification. The younger kids could then identify with Robin, which they couldn't with Batman, and the older ones with Batman. It extended the appeal on a lot of levels. The new character, an orphaned circus performer named Dick Grayson, came to live with Bruce Wayne as his young ward in Detective Comics issue 38 in April of 1940 and would inspire many similar sidekicks throughout the golden age of comic books. Robin was introduced as Batman's sidekick in Detective Comics issue 38 in April 1940. When Kane wanted Robin's origin to parallel Batman's, Finger made Robin's parents circus performers murdered while performing their trapeze act. Finger recalled, "Robin was an outgrowth of the conversation I had with Bob. As I said, Batman was a combination of Douglas Fairbanks and Sherlock Holmes. Holmes had his Watson. The thing that bothered me was that Batman didn't have anyone to talk to, and it got a little tiresome always having him thinking. I found that as I went along Batman needed a Watson to talk to. That's how Robin came to be. Bob called me over and said he was going to put a boy in the strip to identify with Batman. I thought it was a great idea." Comics historian Jim Steranko wrote in 1970 that Finger's slowness as a writer led Batman editor Whitney Ellsworth to suggest Kane replace him, a claim reflected in Joe Disra's description of Finger as notoriously tardy. During Finger's absence, Gardner Fox contributed scripts that introduced Batman's early Bat arsenal such as the utility belt, the Bat gyro/plane and the Batarang. Upon his return, Finger created or co-created items such as the Batmobile and Batcave, and is credited with providing the name Gotham City. Finger wrote the debut issue of Batman's self-titled comic book series which introduced the Joker and the Catwoman. Among the things that made his stories distinctive were a use of giant-sized props, enlarged pennies, sewing machines, or typewriters. Two of the prevalently featured trophies in Batman's Batcave, a full-size animatronic Tyrannosaurus Rex and a giant replica of a Lincoln penny, were both introduced in stories written by Finger. He was one of the writers of the syndicated Batman comic strip from 1943 through 1946. Eventually, Finger left Kane's studio to work directly for DC Comics, where he supplied scripts for characters including Batman and Superman. A part of the Superman mythos which had originated on the radio program made its way into the comic books when Kryptonite was featured in a story by Finger and Al Plastino in Superman issue 61 in November 1949. As writer of the Superboy series, Finger created Lana Lang, a love interest for the teenage superhero. Continuing his Batman work, he and artist Sheldon Moldoff introduced Ace the Bat-Hound in Batman issue 92, Batmite in Detective Comics issue 267, Clayface in Detective Comics issue 298, and Betty Kane, the original Batgirl, in Batman 139. Finger wrote for other companies, including Fawcett Comics, Quality Comics, and Marvel Comics. 1940's predecessor, Timely Comics. Finger created the All Winners Squad in All Winners Comics issue 19 for Timely. Batman's nemesis the Joker was introduced near that same time in Batman issue 1 in spring of 1940. Credit for that character's creation is disputed. Kane's position is that Bill Finger and I created the Joker. Bill was the writer. Jerry Robinson came to me with a playing card of the Joker. That's the way I sum it up. The Joker looks like Conrad Veidt, you know, the actor in The Man Who Laughs, the 1928 movie based on the novel by Victor Hugo. Bill Finger had a book with a photograph of Conrad Veidt and showed it to me and said, "Here's the Joker." Jerry Robinson had absolutely nothing to do with it, but he'll always say he created it till he dies. He brought in a playing card, which we used for a couple of issues for him to use as his playing card. Robinson has countered that Bill Finger knew of Conrad Veidt because Bill had been to a lot of the foreign films. Veidt had this clown makeup with the frozen smile on his face when Bill saw the first drawing of the Joker. He said, "That reminds me of Conrad Veidt in The Man Who Laughs." He said he would bring in some shots of that movie to show me. That's how that came about. I think in Bill's mind, he fleshed out the concept of the character. Robinson added, however, if you read the Batman historian E. Nelson Bridwell, he had one interview where he interviewed Bill Finger and he said no, the Joker was created by me, an acknowledgement. He can be credited and Bob himself, we all played a role in it. He wrote the script of that, so he really was co-creator, and Bob and I did the visual. In 1994, Kane gave Finger co-credit for creating Batman's nemesis the Joker, despite claims on the character by artist Jerry Robinson. Bill Finger and I created the Joker. Bill was the writer. Jerry Robinson came to me with a playing card of the Joker. That's the way I sum it up. The Joker looks like Conrad Veidt, you know, the actor in The Man Who Laughs, the 1928 movie based on the novel by Victor Hugo. Bill Finger had a book with a photograph of Conrad Veidt and showed it to me and said, "Here's the Joker." Jerry Robinson had absolutely nothing to do with it, but he'll always say he created it till he dies. He brought in a playing card, which we used for a couple of issues for him to use as his playing card. Robinson countered that he created the Joker to be Batman's larger-than-life nemesis when extra stories needed to be written quickly for Batman issue 1 and that he received credit for the story in a college course. Regarding the Conrad Veidt similarity, Robinson said, "In that first meeting when I showed them that sketch of the Joker, Bill said it reminded him of Conrad Veidt in The Man Who Laughs. That was the first mention of it. He can be credited and Bob himself, we all played a role in it. The concept was mine. Bill finished that first script from my outline of the persona and what should happen in the first story. He wrote the script of that, so he really was co-creator, and Bob and I did the visuals, so Bob was also." Finger provided his own account in 1966. "I got a call from Bob Kane. He had a new villain. When I arrived he was holding a playing card. Apparently Jerry Robinson or Bob, I don't recall who, looked at the card and they had an idea for a character called the Joker. Bob made a rough sketch of it. At first it didn't look much like the Joker. It looked more like a clown. But I remember that Grosset Ampersand Dunlap formerly issued very cheap editions of classics by Alexander Dumas and Victor Hugo. The volume 1 had was The Man Who Laughs. His face had been permanently operated on so that he will always have this perpetual grin. And it looked absolutely weird. I cut the picture out of the book and gave it to Bob, who drew the profile and gave it a more sinister aspect. Then he worked on the face, made him look a little clown-like, which accounted for his white face, red lips, green hair, and that was the Joker." According to comics historian Les Daniels, nearly everyone seems to agree that Two-Face was Kane's brainchild exclusively. Catwoman, originally introduced by Kane with no costume as the cat, was partially inspired by his cousin, Ruth Steele. Kane, a frequent moviegoer, mentioned that Jean Harlow was a model for the design and added that I always felt that women were feline. Kane created the Scarecrow and drew his first appearance, which was scripted by Finger. Kane also created the original incarnation of Clayface. According to Kane, he drew the Penguin after being inspired by the then advertising mascot of Cool Cigarettes, a penguin with a top hat and cane. Finger, however, claimed that he created the villain as a caricature of the aristocratic type, because stuffy English gentlemen reminded him of emperor penguins. The Penguin debuted in Detective Comics issue 58 in December 1941. According to Kane, he drew the Penguin after being inspired by the then advertising mascot of Cool Cigarettes, a penguin with a top hat and cane. Finger, however, said he created the villain as a caricature of the aristocratic type, because stuffy English gentlemen reminded him of emperor penguins. Kane introduced the Scarecrow and drew his first appearance, which was scripted by Finger. Finger and Kane introduced Two-Face in Detective Comics issue 66. The Riddler was created by Finger and Dick Sprang in issue 140 in October 1948. The Calendar Man was another villain created by Finger without input from Kane. Bill Finger collaborated with artist and character creator Martin Nodale on the original Green Lantern, Alan Scott, who debuted in All American Comics issue 16 in July 1940. Both writer and artist received the byline on the strip, with Nodale in the earliest issues using the pseudonym Mark Dillon. According to Nodale, Finger was brought in to write scripts after Nodale had already conceived the character. Nodale recalled in an undated, latter-day interview, "When I sent it in, I waited into the second week before I heard the word to come in. I was ushered into Mr. Max Gaines' office, publisher, and after sitting a long time and flipping through the pages of my presentation, he announced, 'We like it,' and then, 'Get to work.' I did the first 5 pages of an 8-page story, and then they called in Bill Finger to help. We worked on it for 7 years through 1947. In 1966, Kane retired from DC Comics, choosing to focus on fine art. As Kane's comic book work tapered off in the 1960s, he parlayed his Batman status into minor celebrity. He enjoyed a post-comics career in television animation, creating the characters Courageous Cat and Cool MC Cole, and as a painter showed his work in art galleries, although some of these paintings were produced by ghost artists. DC Comics named Kane in 1985 as one of the honorees in the company's 50th anniversary publication 50 Who Made DC Great. In 1989, Kane published the autobiography Batman and Me, with an updated edition Batman and Me. The saga continues. In 1996, Kane worked as a consultant on the 1989 film Batman and its 3 sequels with directors Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher. Stan Lee interviewed Kane in the documentary series The Comic Book Greats. Artist Bob Kane negotiated a contract with National Comics, a future DC Comics, that signed away ownership of the character in exchange for, among other compensations, a sole mandatory byline on all Batman comics and adaptations thereof. Finger's name, in contrast, did not appear as an official credit on Batman stories or films until 2015. Finger began receiving limited acknowledgement for his writing work in the 1960s. The letters page of Batman issue 169 in February 1965, for example, features editor Julius Schwartz naming Finger as creator of the Riddler. Additionally, Finger did receive credit for his work for National's sister company, All American Publications, during that time. For example, the first Wildcat story in Sensation Comics issue 1 has the byline by Erwin Mason and Bill Finger, and the first Green Lantern story is credited to Mark Dillon and Bill Finger. National later absorbed All American. National's practice in the 1950s made formal bylines rare in comics, with DC regularly granting credit only to Kane, William Moulton Marston, creator of Wonder Woman, under his pseudonym of Charles Moulton, and to Sheldon Mayer. In 1989, Kane acknowledged Finger as a contributing force in the character's creation, and wrote, "Now that my longtime friend and collaborator is gone, I must admit that Bill never received the fame and recognition he deserved. He was an unsung hero. I often tell my wife, if I could go back 15 years, before he died, I would like to say, I'll put your name on it now. You deserve it." Comics historian Ron Goulart has referred to Batman as the creation of artist Bob Kane and writer Bill Finger. Finger's contemporary artist and writer Jerry Robinson, who worked with Kane from the beginning, said, "Bill had more to do with the molding of Batman than Bob. He just did so many things at the beginning, creating almost all the other characters, the whole persona, the whole temper." Batman inker George Russo's, another contemporary, said, "Bob Kane had rough ideas, but Bill was the man behind Batman." A DC Comics press release in 2007 said, Kane, along with writer Bill Finger, had just created Batman for DC predecessor National Comics. Likewise, DC editor Paul Levitz wrote, "The Dark Knight Detective debuted in Detective Comics issue 27, the creation of Bob Kane and Bill Finger." Writer John Broome and penciler Gil Kane created the comic book villain William Hand, aka Black Hand, as a tribute to Finger, on whom the character's name and likeness were based. In September 2015, DC Entertainment announced Finger would receive credit on the 2016 superhero film Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice and the second season of Gotham. Following a deal between the Finger family and DC, Finger received his first formal credit as the creator of Batman in the October 25 comic books Batman and Robin Eternal issue 3 and Batman Arkham Knight Genesis issue 3. The updated acknowledgement for the character appeared as Batman created by Bob Kane with Bill Finger. Kane married his first wife, Beverly, in the 1940s, and the two divorced in 1957. They had a daughter, Deborah. Kane married his second wife, actress Elizabeth Sanders Kane, in 1987. Kane died November 3, 1998, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, at age 83. He is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills of Los Angeles, California. Bill Finger married twice. He and his first wife, Portia, had a son, Frederick. After their divorce, Finger married Edith Lynn Simmons in the late 1960s, but they were no longer married when he died in 1974. Finger was posthumously inducted into the Jack Kirby Hall of Fame in 1994 and the Will Eisner Award Hall of Fame in 1999. In 1985, DC Comics named Finger as one of the honorees in the company's 50th anniversary publication 50 Who Made DC Great. In his honor, Comic-Con International established in 2005 the Bill Finger Award for Excellence in Comic Book Writing, which is given annually to two recipients, one living and one deceased, who have produced a significant body of work in the comics field. Finger posthumously received an Inkpot Award in 2014. On December 8, 2017, the southeast corner of East 192nd Street and the Grand Concourse in the Bronx was named Bill Finger Way. The corner was chosen for its proximity to Poe Park, where Finger and Kane used to meet to discuss their Batman character. Finger's friend and longtime writing partner Charles Sinclair found Finger dead at his home at the condominium Allen House at 340 East 51st Street in Manhattan. The cause of death was occlusive coronary atherosclerosis. Finger had suffered 3 heart attacks in 63, 70 and 1973. Although it was long believed by Sinclair and others that Finger was buried in an unmarked Potter's Field grave, his body was actually claimed by his son, Fred, who honored his wish to be cremated and spread his ashes in the shape of a bat on a beach in Oregon. The first story of the issue, Batman issue 259 in December 1974, would be dedicated to Finger's memory. Fred Finger died of complications from AIDS on January 13, 1992, but he had a daughter, Athena, born 2 years after Bill Finger's death. Athena and her son are Finger's only known living heirs, and her attempts at the prompting of noblemen and comics fans, and aided by her attorney half-sister to restore Bill's legacy, resulted in Warner Bros.' 2015 decision to officially recognize Finger as co-creator of Batman on film and TV projects going forward.